Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I've got my background straight this morning, have I? Let's try and get that straightened up a bit. There we go, that's better. Right, as you probably noticed, I'm actually live this morning. I thought I was going to be doing a recorded show today, but due to the change in the weather, I'm back a little bit early, so I have got a live one for you. What have we got to talk about today? Well, a fair amount. Truck tests in the UK are to be eased, and I'll explain what that's all about. Triumph have revealed some off-road racing plans. BMW have unveiled their 2022 F900 XR bike. I have to admit, completely escaped my notice. The Omega EV200 is an electric bike with a bit of a difference, and I'll explain why that is. And some Gujarat College students have actually built a hybrid bike. So the question is, why has nobody else gone that route? And then finally, we'll finish off with one of the all-time great motorcycling debates: all the gear, all the time, or freedom of choice. It's your decision, and I explain why. So grab yourself a brew, settle down for the next 30 minutes or so with me, Kevin Williams. Right, okay, so what's the first thing I want to mention? Well, it's actually a bit of a reminder. I will be delivering some live presentations, and the if I can actually manage to get the picture up on screen, it's that's the one I was looking for. There we go. That should now appear. There we go. Sights are being seen. Now, I showed it at the beginning of July, first Wednesday in the month. What I'd failed to take into account was it was the Euros 2020 finals, and it was, of course, the semi-final on that particular night. And if you were living under a rock, you may not have noticed England made it to the semis. So obviously that did impact viewing a little bit. So there is a repeat run. It will be another live performance, another live presentation of the show, and that will go out on the first Wednesday in August, which, if I recall correctly, is the 4th. So do look in if you want to find out all about the issues behind visual perception of drivers, why drivers don't see cars, and why drivers don't see motorcycles. They don't see cars either. They don't see buses, and they don't see railway trains. In fact, having been on the Isle of Man electric tramway when a car driver drove into it. But I'll explain all that. I'll talk about conspicuity as well, and how you can improve your use of high-vis aids and day riding lights. And we'll also look at some proactive responses to danger too. So if you want to join me, that's the login date is there. There is a small charge for that of £5, which basically helps me keep updating my research on this and keep writing about the topic, and just basically keep it in the forefront of everybody's minds, because I believe it is probably one of the most important issues facing motorcyclists. Right, okay, so we have Paul looking in, Nick saying hello, Nigel's here. He's not gone out for a ride this morning. He says due to a change in the weather. I had a look at rain radar. I think it's probably rainy over Kent this morning, isn't it? We've actually escaped it here, which means I've got to water the tomatoes later. And Kevin says hi. So good morning to all you folks and everybody else who's out there. So, right, okay, now you'll remember that last time out I mentioned that the DVSA were streamlining the way that some classes driving tests could be carried out. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard that there's currently a shortage of qualified HGV drivers, and that's sparked fears of gaps on supermarket shelves, simply because deliveries can't be made on time. Goods cannot be shifted from one place to another. Now, right now, the shortfall is actually around 60,000 HGV drivers. Now, it's mostly as a result of drivers from the EU leaving the country after Brexit, but it's also natural end of people's driving careers and that kind of thing, people leaving the industry, who are made good by people coming into it after taking a driving test. But the problem is that thanks to COVID, 2020, less than half the number of driving tests for HGVs were carried out than were performed the previous year. So put the two together, and what you have is what's being called the perfect storm. Now, one plan was to relax the post-Brexit immigration rules for drivers to help tackle this shortage, but that's been rejected. So, in fact, what the government have announced have been two measures. The first one, which came out some weeks ago, was that drivers would be allowed to take more time at the wheel before their compulsory rest stops. Now, the second change, which came out earlier this week, is further changes to the lorry tests. And these are going to go up for consultation, first of all. So it's not actually going into law immediately. But the aim is to speed up the process of getting new drivers out on the roads. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps revealed that measures aimed at increasing the overall testing capacity above the current level of 1,500 a week. And one of these proposals would be that the articulated lorry test, you could go straight into that without having to pass a test on a rigid lorry, first of all. The second part is that the off-road manoeuvres, which are part of the current test, would be dropped. Now, I'll come on to exactly what that means in just a moment. No surprise, though, what that's done, of course, is triggered protests from safety campaigners and also the opposition party, Labour, of course, that this will actually lead to safety being put at risk. Labour said it's deeply concerned by the plans. ROSPA condemned what they described as a watering down of the rules, and the Best of Britain campaign group accused the government of sticking plaster solutions which could make roads more dangerous for all drivers. I'll emphasise the could, of course, because we don't know that for sure. Equally, of course, it's no surprise that the government have come out insisting that road safety remains of paramount importance and that all HGV drivers will undergo rigorous testing. Okay, basically what's going on here? What appears to have been missed by many of these negative responses is that the announcement actually states that under these proposals, drivers would still need to take the off-road manoeuvres. So basically, they're not being ditched altogether. What it means is they'll no longer be part of the official DVSA driving test, and this is how it would work. The off-road manoeuvres would actually be examined and signed off by DVSA-approved HGV trainers rather than the DVSA's examiners. So they still have to perform the manoeuvres. They still have to perform the manoeuvres in front of a person competent to see whether they're doing it correctly, and they still have to pass that part of the test. It's just certificated by a different person. So it's rather along the lines of CBT, where an approved instructor signs a piece of paper which validates a new rider's license. So whilst this is actually being talked down and about as a watering down in standards, or by the pro-Brexit lobby, of course, as a triumph for sovereignty, this provision to allow various elements to be tested during training rather than actually by the sort of state driving test was, and I think I'm correct in saying this, originally contained within the original EU directive on driving licenses. And it was actually the DVSA, with the backing of the DFT, who chose to actually gold plate the directive by pulling everything that it could into part of the official test, rather than letting it be handled by DVSA approved instructors. In part that was almost certainly down to the need to justify the DVSA's huge investment, which you'll probably recall, in off-road testing facilities. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because I believe I am correct in saying that exactly the same provisions for certificated trainers to sign off the off-road manoeuvres also apply to the various stages of the motorcycle test. Certainly in France, I've seen driving instructors actually getting the riders to perform the round the cone manoeuvres. So, if a precedent can be set for HGV, is there a hope that training schools could be allowed to run what's currently the Module 1 part of the test on themselves? Because that would certainly help the DVSA clear some of the backlog of motorcycle tests too. So, it's a nice idea. But what I would say is probably don't get your hopes up on that one. There's a big difference between feeding the country and putting motorcyclists on the road. So, right, okay. We have several other people looked in this morning. Samantha said hello. Kevin asks, why would youngsters go to driving with autonomous trucks around the corner? Well, I don't know that autonomous trucks are around the corner. I think there's a lot of issues there to be sorted out, first of all. I think we're still some considerable way away from that, but that's a point for another day. Right, okay, so what else is on in the news then? Well, straight from the desk of Nick Bloor, who's the CEO of Triumph Motorcycles, comes the announcement that the company intends to enter the world of motocross and enduro. Triumph, the press release says, are excited to announce that the development is well underway of a comprehensive range of all new competition motocross and enduro motorcycles, which they say will join their class-leading and globally renowned motorcycle brand to bring engineering expertise to riders and racers worldwide. They also say that they are committing to an all-new Triumph factory race program with a commitment to engage in the top-tier championship racing in motocross and enduro. And they have, in fact, to that end, signed up motocross legend Ricky Carmichael and 5 times enduro world champion Ivan Cervantes, who have both joined Triumph as active partners in testing and preparation. So they say that a timetable for the launch of these motorcycles, as well as the racing program, will appear in the months to follow. Nick Bloor says, today's announcement marks the beginning of a new chapter in the Triumph brand, which everyone at Triumph is incredibly excited to be part of. We're 100% committed to making a long-lasting impact in this highly competitive and demanding world, with a single-minded ambition to deliver a winning motorcycle lineup for a whole new generation of Triumph riders. Well, okay, so where does that leave us? Well, frankly, if Triumph feel that competition is the way ahead to support their brand in the sort of view of the buying public, and that's their decision. As you probably know, they already provide the Moto 2 Grand Prix class engine with their triple motor, and I'm certainly not going to argue with that. After all, sort of the reinvigorated Norton under their new ownership are looking at the TT as a way forward. But it does concern me a little bit that they're, with the modest exception of the new Trident 660, there's little happening in the company that addresses their rapidly aging Western customer base. Back in 2017, you may recall there was an announcement of a tie-up with Bajaj Auto in India, and that was supposed to herald the joint development of a lightweight entry-level Triumph. Now, it's a route that's already been taken by a number of other companies. BMW, for example, have got their 310 series bikes, and you probably know all about KTM and their baby bikes, which are also built in India. But 4 years on, few spy shots aside, and despite an announcement in January last year by Paul Stroud, was the chief commercial officer, that the sub 300cc bike will be rolled out in 2022, that this baby Triumph is still conspicuous by its absence. So will we see a road bike based on this technology? Anybody's guess, really. So, okay, don't forget, you can catch up with these shows on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 here on Facebook. And if you miss them there, you can zip over to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK. Don't forget that all important UK on the end, where you can also see my other products over there, my videos, my 60-second safety videos, amongst others. And you can also, of course, catch up with the old shows here on Facebook if you miss one. YouTube possibly a little bit easier though. Right, so what else have we got for you? Have a look at this. I think it's quite an attractive motorcycle. Again, if I can get it up on screen. Here we go. That is the F900 XR. Now, I have to say that it's the 2022 iteration of the bike, and it's a bike that's actually completely passed me by. It was apparently launched last year, and I completely missed it. I don't think I've ever seen one on the road either. As machines go, I don't suppose it's that unattractive if you like the adventure bike style of motorcycle. And the thing that appeals to me a little bit more about it is that it draws its power from the 895 water-cooled inline two-cylinder motor, and it produces a sort of 100-ish horsepower depending on which review or spec sheet you read. Comes in at a fairly peaky 8,500 RPM, which is quite high actually for a 1000cc twin, I would have thought. But anyway, hey ho. Peak torque's also well up there at 6,750. So I suspect it's a revvy little beast to ride. I've not ridden one of those BMW twins for several years, so I'm a little bit out of date on exactly how they have developed. But I did quite like the earlier twins. They weren't particularly dramatic in terms of power delivery, but they got the job done, and they were surprisingly pleasant to ride, even if the GS version of the, what was it, I think 700, I think it was, I rode first, had a slightly odd handling because it was one of those bikes which put the petrol behind the rider over the top of the back wheel, and you could really feel that weight back there. It was wag the dog as you rode it. It wasn't, in my opinion, a particularly great design move, and it's interesting to see that it was ditched fairly quickly and put back in the conventional place over the top of the engine in a standard petrol tank. So, okay, as I say, I quite enjoyed riding the earlier bike. The thing I would say is that the modest power outputs, to be honest, makes rather more sense than the bigger bike. A buddy of mine has got the 1000cc four-cylinder, and you know it's just monstrously fast. But the interesting thing is, of course, when we go out for a ride together, whilst he does accelerate a bit quicker down the straights, you know, you can't use that power on the bend. So, you know, we stay together as a pair down the road, even though he's got twice as much power as I have. So something like this actually probably would appeal to more riders if they you know, really thought about what they were doing with their power output. But hey ho, people like big numbers, don't they? Anything else to say about it? Well, it's fairly standard. ABS, switchable traction control, 2 riding modes, road and rain, just in case your throttle hand is a bit twitchy in the wet. Talking of the rain, you get a 2-piece position screen, LED headlights, the obligatory Bluetooth enabled TFT instrument cluster is at 6.5 inches across, and you get 2 shades in the new model. You get triple black, although it's a twin, so odd name. Black, Storm Metallic, and Racing Red are the color coordinates, although whether they're color options at added cost isn't entirely clear. The rather unflattering base model of the 2021 range is grey. Let's get the next picture up, and that's the twin cylinder engine. It's, as I said, it's a development of the F850 unit, which dates back to 2008, so they should have had plenty of time to iron out any wrinkles with that one. The chassis is all tested and tried as well. Many of the bits, the the screen, the TFT screen, the scroll wheel, switch gear, the optional electronic add-ons are all borrowed from existing models too. So all in all, the impressive thing is that the bike comes in at the moment at 9,535 according to BMW's website, which is actually less than the Tracer 900 base model. But what you do get, of course, is you get the bike built down to that price. Unadjustable forks, preload and rebound only on the rear shock, and just the 2 riding modes. Now, as with all BMWs, all the goodies come with the factory fit extras packages, and they add significantly to the price. If you throw in the active package, which has got an extra dynamic riding mode, heated grips as well, there's a comfort package which comes with keyless ignition and a center stand. There's also a dynamic package which gives you a quick shifter and more besides, and you can easily bung on an extra £2,000, and eventually the bike tops £12,000. I did have a quick look at second-hand models, and they do seem to be holding their price very well, but then rumour is that there is a bit of a shortage of new bikes around at the moment, so the second-hand market is particularly buoyant. Now, have you got an old Honda 200 sitting around in your garage? If you have, a company called Omega Motors may just be interested in hearing from you, because this is their EV200 motorcycle. And if you look closely, what you'll see is, in fact, it is just an electric motor and battery slotted into the place where the engine would have been in a 1975 Honda chassis. Yep, it's the old CB200, which was possibly one of Honda's nicer little bikes to ride about that time. The range is a claimed 48 kilometers, which is a stonking 30 miles. You get a top speed of 96 kph, which is a gnats under 300 miles per hour. Sorry, what have I just said? 360 miles per hour. Whether the 30-mile range can be achieved at the top speed, not 300 miles an hour, 60 miles per hour, isn't stated, but I wouldn't be too hopeful. So other than because we can exercise, it's hard to see any practical use for that motorcycle. What I would say, apart from the huge rear sprocket, that god-awful tan seat, what is it with tan seats on these kind of bikes? An uninspired respray of the petrol tank, which you'll notice still has the original filler cap attached to it. You get hipster-style sawn-off mudguards, and the only unique feature really is the instrument pod. But the rest of it is bog-standard Honda, which includes, if you look very, very close, and you know your ancient Hondas, the unique pivoting Easy Seas caliper on the front disc that Honda equipped bikes of that era with. They had 2 problems. The first one is that they seized on the pivot, so eventually you found that you'd actually lost half your braking force. If you ever wondered why one of those bikes didn't brake well, you basically had to dismantle the whole caliper hanging assembly and clean it up and grease it, and then suddenly it used to work again, except when it rained, because Honda also managed to fit these bikes with non-stick pads. As soon as there was a hint of rain, they ceased working, so I rather hope that they actually changed their brake pads. Meanwhile, travel over the world as far as Gujarat, and apologies for the rather poor quality photo. It was the best one I could find. Students at an engineering college in Rajkot, out in India, have developed this motorcycle that runs on petrol and electricity. It's homebrewed hybrid with a battery range of 40k. And you get a top speed of 40 kph, so you're not going to go very far, very fast on it. And it appears that there are separate powertrains to the rear wheel depending on which power source you've used. Now, hardly a practical option. I would thoroughly agree with anybody who is immediately thinking that. But it does ask the question, really, if a bunch of engineering students can knock something like that up, why is it that none of the motorcycle manufacturers themselves are looking at hybrid motorcycles? I'm really a little bit puzzled over that one. for, there are increasing numbers of areas where zero tailpipe emissions are the rule to get in. So yes, anyway, why not build some hybrids to tide us over till 2035 when we have to go zero tailpipe? Right, okay, anything else to say? Well, don't forget, if you enjoy the show, you can always head over to my Ko-fi page and you can support me over there. There are also 500 articles gone up. I've just put up a whole bunch more for 2018. So now everything that is between 2014 and 2017 is already up, and I'm well on the way to finishing the articles for 2018, which are all my old Facebook articles. There's plenty to read over there, which is free to read, and there's a very, very modest charge. The cost of a coffee basically gets you 30 days access to the rest of the items. Terry Leach says, good morning. He's late again. Never mind. Snow on the line, he says. Well, I suppose, yes, it is winter out there in New Zealand. Hope it's not proving too chilly for you, Terry. Thanks for looking in anyway. So, right. Let's just take that down. So let's move on rapidly to the final point of the day. You've just been through a bit of a heat wave here, as you probably noticed. And last time out, I was talking about staying cool and keeping hydrated. But predictably, of course, the hot weather's reignited the usual all the gear all the time or freedom of choice debate. Now, we have run towards the end of the heat wave, obviously, at the moment, but there are hints in the medium range forecast that, later on in August, we could see a return to some fairly hot weather. Now, all the gear or freedom? It's an interesting question, and it's one that will run and run. There is no answer to this one, in my opinion. What I would say is that I've worked with Brittany Morrow, as you probably know, on the Shiny Side Up events in New Zealand. That's where I first met her, and I've stayed in contact with Brittany. We do correspond from time to time. She has invited me onto one of her talk events, and I've been trying to get her to appear on mine, but she's been a bit busy recently. Now lockdown's ended out there. She's zipping around doing all sorts of things. Now, Brittany Morrow, her story, if you haven't heard it, is quite a distressing one. She's known colloquially as the road rash queen after she fell off the back of a motorcycle when the boy that she went out for a ride with pulled a wheelie, and she was very inadequately dressed, and she hit the road at around about 120 miles per hour. She lost most of the skin off her body, and she would basically, in most circumstances, have died. Somehow she survived with skin grafts taken from other bits of the body, the bits that were undamaged, patching her up. She spent months in hospital. She got addicted to painkillers. She's been left with life-changing injuries even after the end of her rehab. And she is a very, very brave woman to go out there and continually talk about her story and explain why riding without protective riding kit is a really bad idea. That's one point of view, but it is based on experience. Now, at the other end of the extreme is a story from another person whose point of view I respect, and I'll just give you the link here. It's for the Riders Digest magazine, and it's written by Dave Gurman, the editor, and he puts the alternative point of view. No, that's not gone through. Right, try again. Let's just try and see, get that link up. Oh, no, it has gone. There it is. Right, okay, I don't know why. Sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't. Facebook doing all sorts of strange things these days. So that's a reprise of an item he wrote some years ago, but he, again, because of the hot weather, he put it up. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs out to you. Now, he says, a few weeks ago, as the wife and I fought our way through heavy traffic on our way home from a lovely afternoon spent wandering around the lake and the imported Roman ruins in Virginia Water, we pulled up at a set of traffic lights, and as we were facing a long sequence before we got to go again, I killed the burger van's engine because the temperature gauge was showing a worrying 4 bars. A GS 1200 pulled up alongside with a pilot in full leathers. He looked at us, and there was a photograph of the Dave and his wife Wendy wearing their non-protective clothing. He looked at us in that superior way that most real bikers look at a couple riding a scooter in light clothing and, in the Pillion's case, flip-flops. I'm sure he would have liked to have offered us a sneer, but the horrible truth was he couldn't quite pull it off because his face was melting. Wendy, who's a nurse incidentally, looked at his dripping red face before turning to me and saying, "Surely that's not safe." Dave continues with another statement. He says, as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing when I'm riding a bike is that I'm comfortable and at ease. I struggle to envisage a situation whereby riding without protective gear would actually cause somebody to have an accident, whereas it's not difficult to imagine how heat exhaustion and dehydration might have a profound effect on riders' abilities. Now, what to say about that? Well, in some ways, Dave's sort of consideration of the risks are is an experienced rider likely to fall off? Well, particularly when riding with an eye on the lack of protective clothing. Well, I would say probably not. The evidence is that we don't go out every single time and fall off when we jump on our motorcycles. Rock crashes are relatively few and far between. However, they do happen. So, yes, I am largely understanding with the risks. Of course, there is an uncontrolled element, and that's other road users. So, I am quite happy to go out cycling in Lycra. Don't do it too much more these days, but not too many years ago, I did top 50 miles per hour coming down one of the big Tour de France climbs. Took me a lot less time to get down it than the best part of half a day it took me to get to the top of the damn thing. But I hit 50 miles per hour on that descent, wearing literally a foam helmet, Lycra t-shirt and Lycra shorts. Yet, if I'd gone out on a scooter and ridden around at 50 miles an hour, I know the kind of response that I would have got from other riders would have matched what Dave's experienced. So it's really about where you're riding, isn't it? I mean, if I'm in the middle of London in 20 mile per hour urban traffic, completely at a standstill, my riding gear would probably be a long way stripped down from what I would choose to deal with the cut and thrust of the M25 on a busy Friday evening, even if the temperature was still in the high 20s, or knee-down cornering on a Sunday morning. So there are different situations in which we find ourselves, and there is no sensible single answer to which is the right choice. Now, personally, my own view is that there is a middle way through all this. So I tend to wear something that is abrasion resistant on the outside. I tend to ditch the body armor when it's very hot, and on the grounds that the body armor is relatively useless, apart from adding to the abrasion protection, actually, when you do fall off. And that cools the body down a little bit. There are, of course, if you can afford them, alternative clothing which is vented. There are various mesh jackets which actually do have serious protective ability, but also flow serious air. And what I would suggest that you do here is that you head over to the MotoCap program in Australia, New Zealand. Look up MotoCap, and one thing that you'll find that Dr. Chris Hurren, who is destruction testing these garments and testing them for safety, he's also testing them for their waterproof effectiveness, literally by sort of has designed a test rig to see how quickly the water gets through the protective waterproof layer, but he's also testing them for their sort of thermal properties to see how hot you're likely to get inside the riding kit. Now, a lot of the conventional riding kit does perform very badly. Now, it does get seriously hot in Australia, and it's hotter than it does in the UK. It also gets pretty damn warm in New Zealand. When I was out there a couple of years ago, it was 34 degrees up in the Auckland area, which is pretty warm for riding. And I would certainly have liked some mesh kit to be out and about on that particular day. But one mildly dissenting comment from me, as I mentioned the other week, if you wear nothing on your skin, you don't just get a suntan, as Dave suggested in the article, you actually get hotter than if you're wearing some light clothing. And that's because the solar radiation is directly heating your skin. And that means your hot skin, the blood is actually cooling it down and carrying that heat away into the middle of your body. So your overall body temperature rises. And whilst you can lose some of that via sweating, covering up and with a layer that air can flow beneath. So basically you get aided evaporative cooling, as I was talking about last week. Covering up actually does help keep you cooler. I know it seems counterintuitive when everybody wants to strip off in the sun, but a light and light coloured covering is actually a benefit. And I'll just finish off by making one final statement here. We kind of talk about all the gear all the time as if it's a rule that everybody should be applying, and there are a lot of people saying that protective clothing should be compulsory. You may remember that Spain has been discussing the compulsory use of airbags out in the country. For what it's worth, in the current hot period in the UK that has literally just come to a halt, 24 people died by drowning, but I don't see any calls to make life jackets compulsory. Right, so final point of the session before I go on. I am running a number of evening riding assessments over the course of August. They're inexpensive. The idea is that we go out for an hour. We get out on some nice roads when the air is a bit cooler, and while we still have some daylight, and I get to look at your riding and I give you feedback on how you're doing. So it's basically an hour with me on Zoom, and it's an hour actually out on the road. We'll use the Zoom time to discuss the riding video that I shot from on bike camera and give you some interesting feedback on how you've performed. Right, so if you're interested in that, drop me a line. As always, you can find the website at survivalskills.co.uk. That's it for another show. Thank you very much for looking in. I'll be back on Wednesday with the next show. But in the meantime, do stay safe out there on the roads and enjoy your riding.